In 2004, we finally got up to the site in Pinewood to move the tower. There were a few little problems. We had a big boulder in the way that had to be moved out, and DNR came with a caterpillar to get this boulder out of the way, and we had one big tree. These two items interfered with the crane getting up to the tower. If the crane couldn't get in the right place, then we couldn't pick the tower up. So here the boys are toppling this tree down, and they're putting the caterpillar back on the trailer because the two objects that were in the way have now been moved. Oh yeah, we had to move some brush out of the way because we had to put a trailer called a lowboy in this location so the tower could be laid on the lowboy. So a few inches of brush, I call it, had to be pushed out of the way, and the ground leveled a little bit. Now the crane is in place, except that the top section of the crane is in three pieces and it has to be put together. That top part of the crane came on the lowboy. So the other machine, this one here, that Garrett has, had to be used to pick up these sections of the crane, and you'll see him doing it right now. I think there were two or three pieces that had to be put on there. So he carried this section of the crane over to the crane, and I've forgotten how they actually got it on, but they did it piece by piece. It took about 2 hours to build this, what I call, huge erector set. And I've forgotten how tall the crane was. Once it was in place, about 18 feet up, we had to disconnect the bottom section. We could take the top of the crow's nest down to the point where he's standing right now, and lay it on the lowboy. Now the crane had I call it a jib. So once it's picked up loose from this bottom section and brought over, the tower can be tilted down so it's horizontal, so it can go on to the lowboy. You can see the crane tying onto the top part. What you can't see about middle of the way is another cable going to a pulley halfway on the crane. And the objective here is to lay this tower over and not have it connect to the ground, because if we do, it'll bend one of the feet and one of the legs and try to get that to bend back and stay in alignment. I don't know how you do it. So they were very careful laying this thing down. And there were two steel cables, one at the top and one at the middle. And once it came down through this opening, which had to be made ahead of time, it was lined up on top of the dolly, and before it could be put on there to rest, big wooden blocks had to be put in place so the tower would touch in certain places only and not cause any bending. So now the crane is down and being suspended. I should say the tower is down and being suspended by the crane. The lowboy, which carried a part of the tower, will now be backed underneath this. And it took a while to get this on the lowboy because we had to put some big beams, wood beams underneath, so the tower would rest at the right point. I can't tell what's happening here. Maybe they're trying to get it lined up with the road so they can back the lowboy underneath. Rust on the top, well, we're going to kind of sand that off and prime it and repaint it before it goes up in the air. All right, now the lowboy is coming in. You can't just drop it on there because you'll end up bending something. So this process took a while. And you can see some of the blocks going in place. Paul Holkoff, the Fairgrounds manager, lives in Pinewood, so he came up to supervise, which means to see what's going on. And once the 2/3 of the tower were laying on the blocks, and it would be chained down, and then the truck would bring the tower out to the main road. We had a truck going ahead with a big post on it to make sure we wouldn't hit any power lines. The only thing we had a problem with was a cable TV line had to be pushed up. Somebody had to go on top of the tower and actually lift the cable TV wire over the top. Here's the footings. We left all 4 footings. No need to take them apart. It was about a 10-mile drive down the road, 15-mile drive to get to the fairgrounds. The only problem we had was one corner. We took down a few branches on a tree. Otherwise, it went very, very smooth. Garrett Hansen, the person who ran the construction crew. The bottom section was too wide to take down the road, so it had to be dismantled and brought to the fairgrounds. And here it is, and a section of stairs. And this piece now had to be re-erected on the ground because it had to go on the ground first before you put the top tower section on. These steps were not light. They were made of iron, and they were heavy. Well, here's the first of 4 sides that had to be erected. I don't recall what held the first one up while we were putting the second one in place. Those brown pipes laying on the ground are going to be used for the footing, and they'll be welded together to make one long footing. This went fairly smooth, and once the 4 sections were in place, it just stood there until the footings could be moved, and then this whole tower this bottom section was picked up and brought over the trees and lowered onto the footing, which was not the normal footing. This is a pneumatic pounder, or I should say diesel pounder, and here's the pipe. 2 of them had to be welded together. These pipes are used in bridges for bridge construction. So they weren't as long as they normally would be, so that made for a bit of a problem with the pounder not staying lined up. But once they got the pipe into place in the pounder, it would pound it down into the ground. I think the 2 sections were about 25 feet. Once all 4 sections were in the ground, then they would cut off to the exact length. So the tower then the tower now is being picked up, the lower section that is, and swung over to be placed on top of these steel pipe footings. I mean, these were incredible footings to go down. Normally it's a concrete footing down by 8-9 feet. So this is a footing that was really overdone in a way, but it was kind of easier to do than have to dig a big hole and repound the sand and pour the concrete. The idea now was to get all 4 legs close and checked. Now, before the towers welded, they were filled with concrete, 25 or 30 feet of concrete in each pipe, in each corner, 4 of them. There was extra concrete, so we donated it to the fairgrounds, and this is a bin where they keep, I think it's chipped wood or something to put in the animal barn. So we put down a concrete slab in that bin to keep the chips off the ground. Now we're back lining up the steel plates over the pipe footing, and the steel plates had to be welded now to the pipe. It was tack welded only. We had to stop because the concrete, the heat from the welder made steam from the wet concrete, and if we tried to weld the whole thing, it would blow the weld out. So it was tacked at 4 or 5 corners, and then they waited till the concrete to dry completely and then welded it on. Now here's a frame to pour a footing around it, so it looks like it's an original concrete footing from the 1930s. So the concrete was poured around here, but the actual footing is that steel pipe that goes down 25 or 30 feet. Concrete walkway was made. Now notice the big concrete, well, you missed it. I'll be up in a minute. It's the concrete square slab that the tower footing is, and here it is here. This is, we tried to dig it up by hand and lift it out. We had no idea it was almost 3 feet of concrete. What a job. We had to dig it down, get a chain underneath. We wanted that original footing because all the names of the people that erected this fire tower in 1935 or whatever it was are written in this concrete. So there's a lot of family history from the Pinewood community, and we wanted to save that, so we brought this big footing down to go underneath the steps. Just when we started to dig it up, we had no idea how much we went down 2.5 feet, still had concrete. Finally we hit the bottom, and of course we had to use the crane to get it out because it was way too heavy. And crowbarred into place and anchored down through the concrete. And if you go climb the fire tower, take the time to look at the at that footing and see the names. Maybe you have a relative or somebody there. Now, and I can't see this, the whole tower is being picked up and brought up into a vertical position using, I think it's called a jib connection in the middle, and then the other connection at the top. I'm not sure what the proper name for it is. Didn't have a video camera at the time, so we just took a lot of slides. Now, we had to wait for a day that wasn't windy, because this was a big kite up in the air, and it's a lot of weight swinging around in that breeze if we let it. So we had to wait till early in the morning when the breeze, there wasn't any wind, just a slight breeze, and lift the tower into place. It had to be straight, and somebody had to be on the lower section to line up the holes and throw some pins in a hurry so it wouldn't break free. Now the two sections are mated together. There were pins being dropped in, which were later replaced with bolts, and the whole thing was tied together. Now the tower is ready for the fair. We had to put a fence around it and this kiosk which depicts all the donors. The funding for this was raised privately. The county didn't pay for it. The Fairgrounds Ag Association didn't pay for it. Individual payments, no grants. Individuals chipped in to save the Pinewood Fire Tower. So we had two kiosks. One on the red for the history from family members writing letters. On the right we have the donators, and they get their nameplate put on the step with a number and also on a website. Corporations or businesses could purchase the platform sections. There were 7. We allowed for 2 names per step. Name tags were $20. Commercial account was $100. Platform was $1,000. The view looking to the west from the fire tower, looking to the north from the fire tower, and looking to the east, and that's Lake Bemidji. The flowers are growing, the tower's up, the flag is on, and we're all set. We have to have a ribbon cutting ceremony. We invited Mrs. Zeller, Linda Zeller, and Mrs. Copane, who Mrs. Copane worked the fire tower for 22 years. The fair is on, beautiful view at night. The tower is not open at night. This tent was in case it rained. We have a table, a fire tower display. We have a book signing event for Mrs. Copane and Mrs. Zeller, and these were fire tower cookbooks. Actually, they were Western fire tower cookbooks, because in the out west they live in the fire tower. They're much larger and shorter and closer to the ground. Mrs. Copane, and she's now standing by the list of names of all the donors. She since then has passed on. We do have a video of her up on the website. The video was made back in 1995. This is Linda Zeller before the ribbon cutting ceremony has started, and and she joined us in the book signing ceremony, and that's what you're seeing right here. This is a 1950 cookbook reproduced with some interesting old recipes in there, and people were buying them. Rosella Copang this is in honor of her for 22 years of service, and Mark Zeller, who passed away at an early age. He was a fire tower preservationist, and it was due to the Zeller family that this fire tower was put in place at the Fairgrounds. That was 2004. Now we're going to jump ahead to 2013. It's taken us that long and a lot of work to raise the money. This is the groundbreaking ceremony for the new Forestry Education Center building next to the fire tower. We were lucky in the sense we had our own sand pit, so we could get the sand we needed to make the base for this building. It was pretty handy having it close by. Once the base was in place, then we could pour the concrete and start the construction of the building.
Well, this morning all we did was we stripped all the topsoil. Stripped topsoil, took the stumps out, leveled the topsoil in the front of the building on the slope. And now we're just hauling in the fill, and we're going to pack it in and get it ready for concrete today. So by the end of the day, it should be looking pretty well squared away.
I don't know how many loads of sand it took. We took the topsoil off, and you'll see that probably to the side, and we used the topsoil later. We're going to go over a few minutes of this construction going on, so you have some idea of how much sand was being used. This, of course, was taken from halfway up on the fire tower. Once we had all the sand necessary, then it had to be spread out and leveled as close as possible. I don't know how they did that. I wasn't around to watch it, but it had to be watered a little bit and then packed down hard. We've been waiting since 2004 when the tower had its grand opening, and now, June 18th, 2012, we do the groundbreaking ceremony for the new Forestry Museum and Building. Hurrah! Or something like that. Anybody have any comments?
No.
What do you mean no?
Here's the first scoop.
Here's the first scoop.
There.
Well, we have to do one more.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Scoop. Okay. Oh. Okay, this was the first step. Now this is about, golly, 4 weeks, maybe 5 weeks before the fair started. The building actually went up pretty fast. I should say the shell. Nothing was done inside. Plastic barrier to keep the moisture from coming up into the concrete, because concrete's somewhat porous.
You betcha.
Plus the fact we're going to epoxy the concrete, and we really don't want any moisture coming up from the ground, so the plastic took care of that. Rebars are in place. I think I got this out of sequence a little bit. Oh well, you'll figure it out. This was measured pretty accurately. We didn't have any leftover concrete, or else we would have put it back in that same bin that we used. We put concrete in before, where they save all the shaving chips that they use in the barns. Mike Heckerson and crew framed out the building, I think in one day. The next day they put the trusses on in place, and I was pretty excited. In fact, I thought we were going to have a building we could use for Fair Week, but I realized there was way too much to do. They put some effort in to get the walls up get the trusses up and close it in. So at least during Fair Week, if you were out there last year, you could see the building in place, but there was nothing inside. We initially had thought about putting a couple of bathrooms in to help everybody out, but if we're going to put a septic system in, we decided that we'll put a large bathroom and shower area outside somewhere in the horse arena area, to facilitate everybody, not just a few. So we utilized that space for storage, which we really needed to store some of the display items and utility items for cleaning the floor, etc., etc. This sure beats handing the trusses up one at a time and pulling them into place. And you'll notice shortly here, once they get them down, they drop an aluminum bar from one truss to the next, and that keeps them in perfect center, perfect alignment. Note the planks on the concrete, and that's to keep the floor as clean as possible and to having the heavy bobcat doing any damage to the concrete. Well, watching these trusses go up is probably a little on the boring side, but we're almost finished here. We're not going to show all the trusses going up because it would take too long. And once you see 2 or 3 go up, then you've got the idea of what's transpiring here. So we'll watch for a little bit more. Here's a picture of that brace. Watch them snap it down into place. And these are all temporary, so the trusses stay at an absolutely perfect distance from each other. That's something new. I didn't know that existed. All right, the trusses are in place, and later in the week they add the sides. Well, the opening of Fair Week, we had the building fully enclosed and a sign on it, and the front doors, and a sign that said, "Opening next year during the Fair Week." Fire tower was open. Approximately 700 people climbed the fire tower during Fair Week. Well, come on out to Fair Week. The grand opening will be August 3rd at 11 o'clock in the morning. That's a Saturday. Now you know how the fire tower was moved to the fairgrounds.